So in the level Springfield Mountains in the Simpsons Road Rage video game, if you take the camera all the way past this barrier here that's at the very start of the level, you can find a whole bunch of stuff that goes completely unused. The most notable of which is a sign that's not used anywhere else in the game. It's a sign that says, soft shoulder, blind curves, steep grade, big trucks, good luck. Which is really neat, but it lends itself to an even cooler fact. The reason why these barriers even exist in the first place is apparently because all the maps in Simpsons Road Rage was supposed to connect together into one large map, but that was scrapped at some point during development. So that's why there's all these ridiculous barriers, as well as some stuff that you might be able to find out of bounds as a result of that. And that's not even the only texture that goes unused in Simpsons Road Rage that you can find out of bounds. Like for example, inside the power plant, if you go inside the walls here, you can see Sector 7G written out on this texture here, which obviously is the sector that Homer works in. But like I said, is nowhere to be seen. This is all part of a texture sheet that just wraps around a piece of a model that the player's not supposed to see anyway. So you end up with this cool piece of unused content. And yeah, we're going to look at textures and we're going to look at models and we're going to look at all sorts of crazy stuff out of bounds in an ongoing series where we basically take the camera anywhere we want to try to find secrets and new discoveries to some of our favorite games. And like I said, today we're looking at the Simpsons Road Rage, a game that uses two completely separate models for all of its drivers. But why is that? Because one of these models has a lot more bone articulation that can be used for these cutscenes when you go to select your character. The other is just tied to a vehicle that has a lot of geometry in its own right, and to save on resources, it's a much lower poly model. But as a result of this rushed development, on top of the fact that it's a completely different model, you find a ton of major discrepancy between all the characters, and we'll get to that in a second. But the big weirdest thing of all is that during this character select screen, you can find the legs of the lower poly model of these characters combined with the higher poly models. So you get two sets of legs in almost every single vehicle that you'll see here. Why is this happening? Well, the big reason, of course, is that I just mentioned a second ago that the character model for the vehicle is attached to that vehicle. And so what the developers did was that they just hid all the geometry of those characters and just kind of injected the cutscene model characters into the vehicle instead. But there's not as much of a reason to remove the feet because it doesn't get seen by the player anyway. All the car doors to all the characters essentially hide that. Speaking of things that are hidden, how about Moe's Panda? Which, that wasn't something I was expecting to say in 2025. But yeah, there's a model of a panda that just briefly has a cameo and only in this character select screen. I think the big question is, where does it come from and where does it go? And how much of this panda is modeled? You can see that it kind of just pops into existence and pops out as well. But the model for the panda is complete. Also very interestingly, the trunk door for Moe's car is made into a separate model that is placed on top of the car. The outline for the trunk door on Moe's car is still there. It's not affected because it's not actually a trunk door that is remotely functional. But from the default camera position, you'd never be able to guess. It all looks perfectly seamless. And then here's something I feel like I've never seen on Boundary Break. It's the shadow for all the vehicles, and they handle this in a very strange way. So the shadows work just fine on the surface of whatever the vehicle is casting on, but below the environment itself, there seems to be a 3D model of the vehicle you're using, but shadowified. This has to be one of the most unusual developer techniques I've ever seen. And on top of this too, if you look very, very closely, you can see the shadow connecting to the vehicle itself, almost looking like marionette strings. Next up, I want to show you the discrepancy between those two models of the driving model and the cutscene model that we talked about earlier. One of the weirdest changes was Reverend Lovejoy. On the cutscene model, he just has his pink shirt and tie, but in game, he has like that cardigan thing going on. Out of all the characters, I'd say that this is probably the most egregious one because again, he got a complete outfit change between the two models. Also, as a quick little bonus, taking the camera behind his vehicle in the cutscene version can show you that it's not textured properly, so you see a lot of black here. You can also see that the pile of the books is actually completely different. It's a lot larger in the cutscene model as well. And again, one of the craziest changes between the two models, at least in terms of quality at least, is Groundskeeper Willie. In the cutscene version, his overalls are properly colored and the model looks fantastic, frankly. But in-game, it is just a completely different story. His overalls are not only just one shade completely different from the show, but two shades different. So the upper torso has this dark blue and his pants have a light blue. Clearly one of the most rushed models in the whole game. Then here's two very interesting differences for Chief Wiggum. Taking the camera behind Chief Wiggum during the character select screen, you can see that one of the tries on his face gets dragged and shoved down below, but it's out of the player's view, so it's okay. It's not all that distracting when you don't move the camera. But here's the real kicker. I want to show you the big difference between his cutscene model and his in-game model. The piece inside of his holster is pitch black, and his nose just has no nostrils whatsoever for the cutscene model. But in-game, his piece is gray, and his nose has a very, very high-res texture for some reason for the nostril. And then weirdly, Rabbi Hyman Krastovsky has something going on with his character model that I guess got overlooked by the developers. If you take the camera up to his arms, you can see that he has 4 arms, likely meant to represent 2 levels of detail, but they just never load in or load out. It's just always like this. Also, he has Minecraft legs underneath his outfit. They're like completely square. And next, for a rare move for this game, there's an open window that allows you to see inside of a room. Taking the camera inside will show you the classroom that Bart usually does chalkboard writings for. And the chalkboard says, "This is not a clue, ... Or is it?" But also what I find really interesting too is the picture next to the chalkboard is unique. It seems to be a gray-haired gentleman facing off to the right. And then for this power plant console, I saw that it had writing on it for some reason, so I wanted to take the camera up and see what it said. And someone was just mashing on the keyboard here. If you want me to read it out for you, fine, I will. It says ash fast fed h dad and has HJJH. You're welcome, internet. Now, this next one was a bit disappointing for me because I was like, ooh, level of detail. I love this. And so all the characters in Simpsons Road Rage have billboard versions of themselves before you get close enough and they turn into big, real versions of themselves. But sadly for me, but great for all of you, there is a cheat code where you can see these up close and use them as the passengers you can take around Springfield. So it's not terribly exciting for me to show you all this. I guess there are characters that you can never take into your vehicle like Laureline Lumpkin. But while I was expecting myself to have some of the greatest content to put on YouTube, I was collecting this footage of Seymour Skinner and it allowed me to see the character model up close, and I realized that his pupils are not modeled. You can actually see through his face and past his skull if you look inside of his pupils, because again, that modeling doesn't exist. Why doesn't it exist? There is a really solid chance that too many tries went into the pupil, and so to save on resources, the developers would hope that you wouldn't notice that the pupils are missing entirely. This actually happens in several instances, like Reverend Lovejoy's character select screen model. In fact, you can see that his eyeballs is semi-transparent, which is really surprising. And the same exact thing could be said for Moe's character select model. But then there's characters that just sort of defy all the logic of all the other characters, like Ned Flanders here. Take the camera up to his passenger model, can show you his eyeballs that have no pupils whatsoever. Looks kind of demonic here, which I guess is appropriate for certain episodes of the show. And then funny enough, on the loading screen, you can manipulate the animation that Bart has playing the video game on his TV. And if you do, you can place it over the Simpsons Road Rage logo, and you can see exactly where these collection of images are actually supposed to camouflage with the dark void. And then I wanted to zoom the camera out here to show you this large piece of environment just to show you how the game world works. See, it does use culling, and the way the culling works is that it culls out large chunks of the game world. So as long as you're facing in a certain direction, the game will give you a giant square to look at, which is honestly something great to ask for when you're playing these old school games on a 16:9 aspect ratio screen, because there won't be culling to your immediate left or right when you decide to do that. Here's another character model oddity here with Grandpa Simpson. If you take the camera up to his model, you can see that one of his eyeglass pieces is opaque, while the other one is just missing its lens. This was probably done to show off Abe's right eye better to the player. I would say that there's a solid chance that this wasn't a mistake. Also, before we move on, I just want to show you the character select screen itself and how the background is all 2D and it quickly gets off its axis and leaves you with this 3D render of the road. Just thought it would be neat to show you the perspective shift between how it's supposed to look versus how it looks here. And then one of the very few cutscene rooms that are actually rendered in game is Mr. Burns' office. So, taking the camera around and showing you what's up with it, you can show you that the word floor is written on that switch that he uses as one of the endings of the game. And also that there's walls on almost every corner of this room except for the one that's facing Mr. Burns. This is likely so that the camera that is pointing at Mr. Burns won't be obstructed by the wall that will be placed there. Also interesting to note that Krusty has a shared model with Homer. So with this model here, you can see that it's just Homer's model with hair added to the sides and top of his head. The nose, however, is just Homer's nose painted red. And also, he's not colored quite right, so it almost looks like his Krusty 5 o'clock shadow is just skin. Not quite the greatest model in the game. By contrast, you can see that the cutscene model of Krusty has a proper nose, and that his 5 o'clock shadow has a much more distinct color than the rest of his face. Also, when you select Snake on the character select screen, his car goes all over the place, but most of it's off screen. So I just wanted to show you what that looked like from another angle. It is very surprising to share that the entire cutscene is pretty much animated except for Chief Wiggum's. His car model just sort of stops when it gets off screen. Also, weirdly with this cinder block in the power plant, if you take the camera inside, you can see a lone radioactive barrel. Why it's here, I have no idea. I'd be very curious to see what would happen if you hit that barrel, because it feels like the developers had to make sure that a game-breaking bug or something had to be contained inside of this block. Or maybe it was just a little joke that the developers themselves were playing, that where they're trying to contain radioactive material inside of stone blocks, which is something that happens. And that's all I got for now. Make sure you check out the Patreon if you want to support me during these tough early months of the year. And if you're new or haven't checked it out already, I have a Simpsons Hit and Run episode as my favorite animated intro of the entire series I've ever put out, as well as a cool special guest by one of the game's developers, Carrie Brisebois. Not trying to oversell here, but I do think it's like one of the greatest Boundary Break episodes of all time. It's definitely worth a high recommend for me. Anyways, guys, thank you so much for watching and take care.